Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in opposition of this bill. I was on the Citizenship and Immigration Committee when we completed our report detailing how to better protect women in our immigration system. Frankly, Bill S7 that was created after that study, I even hate saying the name, the short title of it, but I'm going to say it for our sake for here, the Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. It doesn't do anything to actually protect women from violence, as it actually claims to do. And it was interesting to hear from the minister's speech that she actually potentially thought that it was protecting women when it really isn't doing that. Most of the practices the bill hopes to curb, including polygamy and honor killings, are already illegal in this country. So Bill S7 isn't doing anything new other than it's focusing on criminalizing other behavior. When the Citizenship and Immigration Committee was hearing testimony for our report, experts agreed that women who are experiencing violence need supports like housing, counseling, and assistance in navigating the complex family, criminal, immigration, and legal systems. And the experts also agreed that the women who are coming into this country should be provided information about our systems in this country before they even come into the country or at the border when they arrive at the airport in languages that they could understand to ensure that women are protected and are educated and made aware of the support systems that we do have available in Canada. We were saddened, Mr. Speaker, to hear testimony about how conditional permanent residency status had contributed to people being in trapped, abusive relationships. How? Because the immigration status of the woman is tied to her partner. And that means that if she were to report violence in her relationship, or if she were to leave that relationship, then she would fail her conditional permanent residency status, and she would end up being deported from this country, which means that she could be going back to a country or a situation that is not ideal or is not safe, or where she could be persecuted or stigmatized for leaving a conjugal relationship or for leaving a marriage. And there's many cultures around the world, or many countries around the world, where women are stigmatized, including Canada, Mr. Speaker, where women are stigmatized for seeking a divorce or for leaving an abusive relationship. In their report about Bill S7, the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario asserts, and I quote, "This bill appears to extend a trend in this government's track record to strip permanent residents and deport more and more racialized people from Canada, regardless of how long they've been here," end quote. SALCO's report also continues to assert that, and I quote again, "In preparation for this legislative and procedural change, they have failed to consult experts in this field about what creates further barriers to accessing safety for women experiencing violence," end quote. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, that our government's Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration compiled expert testimony on protecting women in our immigration system, and most of these recommendations that came out, the report didn't even include all of the good recommendations that came from experts. But even the ones that were presented by the committee, we spent days and weeks studying this topic, and the recommendations that did come out in the report are still not addressed in this bill that the government has brought forward through the other chamber. So let's talk about what Bill S7 actually does. It makes being in a polygamous relationship grounds for finding a permanent resident inadmissible in this country. Polygamy has been illegal in Canada since 1892. So what is it really accomplishing? Nothing new. And immigration law and policy already contains provisions addressing polygamous unions, so nothing new is being introduced here. I know that the government has asserted that there are hundreds of polygamists already living in Canada today. So if that is the fact, then why is our government not actually enforcing our existing laws? Because they want to get rid of polygamy in this country, then why aren't they ensuring that the laws that already exist since, let me make sure I get the year right, 1892, why are they not ensuring that those laws are actually enforced? Moving on to the topic of honor killing. Murder is murder is murder. And it's illegal in this country. And so this bill would preclude a defendant in a murder trial from arguing an insult to family honor provoked his or her action. Canada's courts are sufficiently equipped, Mr. Speaker, to sentence somebody for murder. And that is what we have seen happen in this country when somebody tried to claim honor killing, that we've seen our courts actually uphold our laws and sentence the perpetrators of these murders and treat them as murderers and sentence them to jail time. So I don't understand why this government is pretending like they're creating a new law here when really nothing is changing once again. Mr. Speaker, the bill also criminalizes forced marriages. Citing data from the South Asian Legal Clinic, that's SALCO again, their study on forced marriage. However, Bill S7 ignores SALCO's recommendation, which is to protect families and provide adequate supports to vulnerable women. SALCO's experts specifically warned against criminalization, as this is more destructive than actually helpful. Mr. Speaker, I am 100% against anybody being forced into a marriage, but we have to ensure that we are protecting the women who are actually in these situations where they've already been forced, and ensure that they're being given the supports to leave in a safe way, to ensure that they are secure and safe in their own safety and in the community that they are living in. Mr. Speaker, I want to read you a couple of quotes from, I hope I'm saying this right, the Schleifer Clinic, in a report that they issued. It says, and I quote, "If passed, the Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act, introduced on November 5, 2014, will serve as another example of institutional barriers to marginalized communities reporting violence and having access to support. It will serve as another example of how our government is failing to listen to survivors and targeting racialized communities for exclusion and deportation from Canada." They continue to say that the Schleifer Clinic has grave concerns about the Act, which would result in the exclusion, deportation, and criminalization of families or of women themselves, which only serves to further harm women experiencing violence. So, Mr. Speaker, we see that from experts on the ground that this bill is not really helping women. It's not protecting women. It's not supporting women. It's actually going to end up doing the opposite. Now, I know earlier when the first time I read the short title, I told you I didn't want to say it and I don't like it. It's because it's actually very xenophobic, and it reinforces prejudice against certain cultural groups by targeting racial minorities for practices that are, in fact, found in Canadian society at large today. I want to read you a quote now. I keep on coming back to experts because they're the ones who are working on the ground and doing the research on the ground. And here's a quote from A.V. Yao Go, who is the clinic director from the Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic. She says, and I quote, "From the very naming of this bill to the various legislative amendments it seeks to amend, Bill S7 invokes racist stereotypes and fuels xenophobia towards certain racialized communities." A quote from Deepa Mattu, the staff lawyer and acting executive director of the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario. And here's the quote. "Giving it a shock factor name will not eliminate the issue. Instead, it will force perpetrators to take this underground, ensuring the victims and potential victims are isolated from resources. This causes a greater risk to their safety, not to mention their emotional and mental well-being." Another example of another expert telling us how this short title of this bill is xenophobic and is actually going to be, and this bill as a whole is going to be more harmful for women in our country. I'm not sure what our Conservative member across the way is yelling here, Mr. Speaker. I can't really understand because his microphone's not on, but I'll continue with my remarks here. Mr. Speaker, while I agree that no woman, regardless of her race, citizenship, status, or religion, should be subjected to gender-based violence, including the practices of forced marriage or underage marriage, I do not support making more women more vulnerable in this country. Mr. Speaker, I can go on for many more minutes, and I notice you've given me the 1 minute notice, so I'd like to actually end my remarks with saying that this bill has not had proper or adequate consultation, and as you notice, I have many more sheets to go in my prepared remarks, but I want to read you. I'm going to go back to the experts because there was a report or a media release that was sent out by 13 expert organization groups, and I don't have time to name them all, and I want to read a small blurb from their introduction, and here it goes. The announcements in the tabled bill perpetuate myths about practices of polygamy and forced marriages while misguiding Canadians to believe that violence against women is a cultural issue and happens in only certain communities. The government has blatantly targeted marginalized and racialized communities through the racist framework used in the intent, wording, and announcement of this bill. This inflammatory language and the perpetuation of racist myths is itself an obstacle to understanding the harmful effects of these proposed legislative amendments. As organizations dedicated to advancing the rights of all women, we are painfully aware of the challenges faced by all women in Canada from all walks of life and backgrounds to find a safe and secure home. In that regard, I'm just finishing that last sentence here. Immigrant and racialized women face additional challenges because of their race and or their precarious immigration status. Contrary to what the government has stated, the proposed legislative changes will not result in greater protection for women victims of domestic violence, but will have the opposite effect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your time.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Don Valley East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last time this bill was debated, the members of the official opposition kept saying that the bill would marginalise victims. But the truth is that actual victims of these barbaric practices support the bill. How does the opposition stick to the rhetoric when actual victims are coming up in support of this bill? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Scarborough Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. In Canada, growing up, I am a victim of domestic violence. I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and this barbaric practice happened in Canada by Canadians, not by any foreigner, Canadians. So, Mr. Speaker, this barbaric practice, there's many people who are survivors of violence perpetuated against women anywhere, not just domestic violence, but violence perpetuated towards women all across this country, and that is the root problem. And those systemic problems of women who continue to have to face racism, sexism, and all types of discrimination and violence, that needs to stop, and the systemic barriers that this government continues to support are the problems, and those are the problems that need to go away, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Every society has some form of gender violence that exists, that's very real and it's very tangible. When we take a look at Bill S7, and I was listening to the Speaker's comments in regards to the number of stakeholders that have taken offence to it, even the Liberal Party has been fairly clear in regards to the use of the word culture. One would think that the Prime Minister's office has a special group of individuals that sit around a table to try to create these names, and they throw in these adjectives. Here we have zero tolerance for barbaric cultural practices. And there is no doubt it is exceptionally offensive to many people that the word cultural would be being incorporated into the legislation in terms of the short title. And it seems to me, in listening to the member, that that's what is most offensive more than anything else. It seems that there might be some value in certain parts of the legislation. My question to the member is that if the government were to amend the word cultural out of the legislation, does she see any value whatsoever in supporting it?
Honourable member for Scarborough Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would support the entire short title being deleted and omitted completely, because that, I think, is the best way to actually fix this title. I actually want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, within the Conservative team even, there's Senator Andrzejczuk who actually said that, I'm reading from a media article here, that in the title, if you wanted barbaric cultural practices, which probably wasn't going to be my choice, but if you wanted that, I wish you had added something like violence in there. Because that is what the root problem is. And I laud Senator Andrzejczuk for realizing that the root problem here is violence against women. And it's prevalent in all societies. And I've worked with Senator Andrzejczuk on many issues with respect to sexual and reproductive health rights, and I thank her for the work that she's doing. And maybe the rest of the Conservative team should actually listen to, fine, they don't want to listen to experts. Let them at least listen to members in their own caucus and team.
Question et commentaire. L'honorable député de Québec.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors que j'écoutais mon honorable collègue parler justement de cette question importante, Ce que je me disais, c'est dans le fond, je me demandais si elle était d'accord avec moi pour l'idée, bien sûr, que ce que ça, on a vraiment besoin, c'est des ressources. C'est des ressources humaines, des ressources financières. Mais ce qui est certain, c'est qu'il faut placer ça pour pouvoir s'assurer de pouvoir travailler correctement là-dessus. Peut-être que je sais qu'elle doit avoir justement une circonscription comme la mienne où c'est en investissant dans les ressources des organismes, des corps policiers, des différents intervenants sur la première ligne où vraiment, là, on a un impact sur notre société et qu'on permet vraiment de s'attaquer à des problèmes par lesquels on ne sait pas toujours par quel bout les prendre, mais que, justement, c'est un premier pas en discutant avec la communauté, en investissant là où il faut. J'aimerais lui céder la parole à ce sujet. Merci.
The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from Quebec for her question. And she's exactly right, Mr. Speaker. Instead of a sensationalized bill that doesn't actually get to the root of the problem, the minister should actually commit to widespread and meaningful consultations with community groups and experts so that the real issue, once again, of gender-based violence is addressed in a meaningful and effective manner. The government should actually increase their investments in organizations that provide services such as safe and affordable housing, counseling, and supports in navigating our very complex systems of services that are available. And immigrating to a new country can be very traumatizing for a young woman if this is the first time she's ever leaving her home country, and ensuring that she has every support that she needs in a manner that she can actually comprehend and digest is very important. And I do really from the bottom of my heart wish that this government would actually take some interest in investing in resources and the agencies who are providing these much needed services with mostly volunteers and, very, very meek budgets.